Vietnam has probably, in Southeast Asia and even globally along the world, I think it's probably one of the best tech markets.
Sounds great. Let's talk about the Homebase.
We will basically buy the home first for them, and then the consumer will actually own up more and more equity over time, and then once they fully own it, then we'll transfer the property back to them. You can almost think of us as almost like a marketplace, right? One side is actually the consumers, but the other are almost like capital providers.
But YC is number one incubator in the world, at least this is seen like that.
It forces you to almost like be competitive in terms of how fast you grow. It almost gives you peer pressure to actually achieve your targets.
What's your advice for a future leader?
Wow, that's a very, very tough question, I think. Ultimate accountability, right? We want people to act like the leader themselves.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the CTO show by Tech Vibe. I'm Michael. Next to me is Phillip An, co-founder of Homebase. Phillip, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here.
Phillip, I would like to start about asking you about why Vietnam. You are being American with the family roots in China. Why you are here?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's something that we get very often. So before kind of moving to Vietnam, we started this business actually in Singapore. And at that time, we were exploring Southeast Asia as an entire market because we really believed that Southeast Asia had the most growth potential. As you mentioned, my kind of experiences before is I was working in big tech companies in San Francisco, mainly in the United States. But I really believe that Southeast Asia is at this very crucial moment of growth whereby you have a very fast growing emerging middle class. You have very good technical talent here as well. And because of that, I think there was a lot of business opportunities that we viewed that could kind of been taken advantage of in Southeast Asia. And when we started the business, we actually talk to consumers across many different markets, across the Philippines, across Indonesia, obviously in Singapore because we were there. And in terms of our business, what we do, which is more real estate financing, I think the need here in Vietnam is actually probably one of the strongest, but also the market dynamics made a lot of sense in regards to the fundamentals. So we moved here and haven't looked back ever since. Yeah.
Sounds great. Let's talk about the Homebase. When I think about a need for a home, I think about buying or renting. And you are something like a third way, right?
Yes, yeah. Well, I think the general kind of problem that we're trying to solve here at Homebase is just trying to find a more accessible way to get access to real estate financing here in Southeast Asia. And I think the fundamental problem is that, a lot of people want to buy a home, but, real estate prices in Vietnam especially have gone through the roof, right? So between, I would say 2012 to 2019, the average apartment price was increasing something like 10 to 15% every single year. Right. And then if you go to a traditional bank, right, it's very, very expensive. So the traditional mortgage rate is between like 10 to 15%, right, every single year. And you also would need to save up maybe a 40 or 50% deposit. And so what that means is that your income requirements are very, very high, right? And we talk to many consumers here, right? And, I would say that in Vietnam, there's a cultural kind of affinity to owning real estate because, if you're a guy, especially before you get married, you almost have to have a property and own a home and those kind of things. But, because of the way that the current economic situation worked out, it was almost impossible for these people to be able to access home financing. So we thought, hey, what if there's a better way? And, once we kind of came to Vietnam, we talked to many consumers and basically had the same issue, right? So how Homebase works is that, if someone wants to own a home, they come to us, maybe they have a property in mind or they're still looking for an asset, and then we'll actually evaluate it. So we're on the same side, and we will basically buy the home first for them. And then the consumer will actually own up more and more equity over time. And then once they fully own it, then we'll transfer the property back to them. So all in all, it's a more accessible and more empathetic way for someone to be able to get access to real estate financing. Yeah.
It actually sounds amazing. But tell me, if I'm in this process, if I'm your customer, if I'm losing a job and I cannot afford, can I stop the process, or is it like typical just chasing you for more money and that's it?
Yeah, so at Homebase, I think our incentives are aligned because we ultimately want you to be able to kind of buy out the home, right? Both us and, we work with many kind of institutional investors across the entire world. So we'll definitely try our best to find a empathetic way for you to either, restructure the financing plan in the way that works. And if not, we'll basically just sell the property together, and then maybe you've built up some equity, and then we'll allow you to actually basically get the get the equity that you built up from the home.
Sounds like fantastic proposition. So thanks for sharing about your company, but I would like to talk about the technology in your company. You position yourself as a PropTech company and how this actually works, because what we spoke till now, it's more about financing. It's, I would say, fintech, not property technology company.
Yes. There's many ways that I think technology permeates this kind of space of what we're doing, right? I think one of the very, very basic ones is, before you actually buy a home, you need to actually appraise the property value, right? And this is because obviously, if you're a bank, you need to actually see, how much this house is worth. So the financier is comfortable giving, 70% or 60% or whatever of the asset value it is, right? And I think traditionally the way that people do it is very manual, using comps, right? So they would actually find similar properties in a similar area and then try to do it. But obviously that is a very error-prone method. And obviously, that method also introduces a little bit more opportunity for, bad actors basically to manipulate that process. So one of the ways that we think about is how can you use, an asset valuation model by using property prices for the entire city to actually predict, what this property is actually worth in a more systematic basis, right? But not only for the property today, but also the future appreciation and the future capital appreciation of this property. So that's one really basic way, right? Another kind of example I'll give you is, behind the business is actually very, very complicated, right? You can almost think of us as almost like a marketplace, right? One side is actually the consumers, right? Which are, people who actually want to invest or buy property, but the other are almost like capital providers, right? And these capital providers are maybe big, funds, or they're big family offices or institutional funds across all over the world. And, they have a lot of capital that they'll give you, but everyone has certain terms, right? So sometimes when you buy a property, you have to mix and match all of this capital. So in terms of tracking where everything comes from and how do you actually optimize the cost of capital so that we can give the best deal to our consumers, it's a very, very complicated process. And then managing that entire kind of life cycle is something that, we need to do as well. So definitely on the operation side, yeah.
Yeah, that's also something that I'm familiar with in my past, like having on loan books and all those things that are coming with the financing. It's definitely complicated. But how do you find the tech market? I mean, tech industry in Vietnam. How easy it is to find good people and build the thing here?
Yeah, I would say that we're very, very lucky because I think Vietnam has probably in Southeast Asia and even globally along the world, I think it's probably one of the best tech markets. So even before kind of starting this business, my co-founder actually ran, also a cross-border business that was, founded in Singapore, and then he operated in various markets. And he also tried to actually hire a lot of engineers across Indonesia, across Malaysia, Vietnam as well. And I think his experience was actually that in terms of technical talent, Vietnam had, one of the top kind of abilities and skill sets, and also in terms of price, it was very competitive compared to similar markets as well. And I think, for us as well, I think we've been very, very fortunate and very lucky to kind of be able to hire a really, really good and very capable technical team. Even a lot of the engineers who speak English and, are able to kind of really adjust to an international environment, which is quite impressive as well. So overall, we've been quite pleased with the technical talent here. Yeah.
Sounds good. Let's talk again about the startup journey.
Sure.
So we see that the market is difficult for startups to get foundings at the moment. How it was for you back in the past and right now?
Yeah. I would say our founding journey was definitely had a lot of ups and downs, right? So for context, my co-founder and I, we actually started this business in Singapore. We were both entrepreneur in residences at a venture capital fund in Singapore. And we decided to kind of, get together because we really believed in kind of the mission. And we had a passion for real estate and empowering people who actually could, to actually own a property. At that time, though, we actually, were working with a third co-founder, and basically, long story short, turns out we were working together very, very well. And 6 months later, when we were raising our first round of funding, right, which is, the pre-seed or seed round of funding, one of the venture capital investors that we were pitching found out that this third co-founder, his name appeared on a financial crimes database. Yeah. And we were like, what? Like, there's no way, right? Because, we had worked with this guy and it was someone who we really, really trusted. And, when my co-founder and I, we did more diligence in terms of who he was, it actually completely, we found a CV, a resume that completely matched basically this publication, right? And we were just shocked. And obviously after that, you were three men, you have an idea, and you have nothing else, right? So when you have to go tell your investors that, oh, this is actually what happened, a lot of investors actually pulled out, right? And so we were back to square zero. And my co-founder and I, at that point, it was one of the hardest times because, again, like, you don't have anything, you don't have any traction, and your reputation is ruined. And so when we had to kind of go back and, we couldn't really pitch the VCs because the VC community is very, very small. So we had to basically message a lot of people on LinkedIn and a lot of small angel investors. And we were able to scrape together a very, very small round of funding as our first kind of seed round of funding. And then we were fortunate enough whereby, after kind of raising that funding, we're able to, come to Vietnam, launch the business, prove out traction, do some transactions. And we were very, very fortunate to be, I think before us, there was no other company from Vietnam that was funded by Y Combinator, actually. So, after YC, I think a lot more people believed in us. We were able to raise more funding, attract a team, and scale the business from there. But I would say that, yeah, that beginning stage, right? Especially when you have that, kind of co-founder thing and all your investors pulled out, I think it was very, very tough, right? And I think, the good thing now is that I think it's becoming easier and easier because even in Vietnam, you see that there's many, many venture capital funds that just specialize in Vietnam. So the sources of funding, the availability of funding is more diverse than ever. Yeah.
That's surprising. I think my personal impression was that it's getting harder and harder, but I hope you're right. I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's getting harder on a macro scale because, in the past 2 or 3 years, I'm sure a lot of your viewers know, but like there's this entire macroeconomic situation whereby, before the U.S. government, the U.S. Fed was printing a lot of money, right? So there was a lot of inflation of different assets. And now because the Fed has increased interest rates, now a lot of these asset values have popped and come down, and venture capital is definitely one of those assets. So people are a little bit more conservative. But, I think if you look at Southeast Asia and specifically Vietnam now, in terms of the availability and the number of venture capital funds that just focus on Vietnam as a whole, I think it's more than ever, right? But whether or not, valuations are high or, they're going to actually give you money, like that's a completely different story.
That's a different story.
Yeah,
for sure. For sure. You have mentioned the YC. This is something that I would like to ask you because many people say that the support from the combinators like incubators or like YC, it's not that great. But YC is number one incubator in the world. At least this is seen like that.
Yeah.
What's your experience with working with them? You also work with Antler, I believe, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were very lucky because we had amazing experiences with both Antler and YC. For Antler, one of our really close advisors, her name is Winnie. She was the CEO of Property Guru, actually. So when you think about, hey, this is the type of business model we're trying to do in Southeast Asia, and like in terms of building a team, she handled everything basically. So even now, like sometimes when we have questions about hiring or about operations or about people management, like we can actually call her, right? And she has a lot of insights, and she was one of these really fundamental advisors for us. But I think YC for us was also very, very incredible. I mean, my co-founder and I had we've been fans of like Paul Graham and Sam Altman, like a lot of the essays they wrote for a very, very long time, right? And so when we did the batch, actually, it was like winter 21. So our batch was fully remote. So maybe that experience was a little bit different. But, the first kickoff batch, right? You have the founders of Airbnb, right? And then the next week it's Drew Houston from, Dropbox, right? And then it's like the founders of Stripe, and then the founders of like all of these multi-billion-dollar businesses. And the insights and the kind of the advice that they gave you is very, very intimate, right? It's almost like, they were saying that, okay, when I was in your shoes, right, X number of years ago, this is exactly what I was thinking. And these are the same problems that we're struggling with, right? So it's like very motivating because obviously now their businesses are multi-billion dollars and, they're all billionaires and stuff like that. But it's like, it harkens back to when they were a very young startup and how you can do it. And I think, the advantage of YC, I think, is twofold. Number one is it forces you to almost like be competitive in terms of how fast you grow, because in your batch, right, there's many different startups in a lot of different areas, right? And the group partners have a set growth rate that you have to grow every single week, every single month, right? And so if you're not growing that fast, you almost feel like left out. So it almost gives you peer pressure to actually achieve your targets by the end of the YC batch, by demo day. So that's number one. And I think the second one is that, especially from Southeast Asia, maybe if you're doing a real estate startup in Vietnam or anything in Vietnam, maybe a lot of these bigger investors, they don't really trust you, or they don't really understand the market. But I think what YC does very well is that, it gives you that reputation, that credibility, that trust, and, it makes it easier to raise capital and those kind of things later on as well.
Yeah, I believe the last part is real true.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Philip. I would like to switch a topic at the moment. Our audience is interested in advices in career, in growing as a leaders, potential CTOs. And my question for you, what's your advice for a future leader? What skills you should learn? What qualities you need to be a great leader?
Wow. That's a very tough question, I think. I think the biggest thing, at least for me, is just like learning by doing almost. And I don't think anything will prepare you to kind of be a manager or be a leader. It's almost like you have to be thrown into the fire, right? And so I think a lot of people, especially when they're beginning their careers, maybe they will work for a very big company like a Google or Facebook, because obviously very good salary, very good brand, very good reputation. And I also kind of thought the same way. So I started my career in professional services. In my last role in the US, I was at this company called LinkedIn, right? So very big company. And this was after the Microsoft acquisition for $26 billion. Amazing company, because, every month we get $3,000 of like yoga benefits, Uber, I think at some point they had like a Michelin star chef, right? So it's like, wow, this is a great life,
Great
right?
place.
But I do think that when you talk to a lot of people who work in big tech, what you realize is that you become very specialized in a very small niche, a very small feature, right? So it's not saying that, okay, all big tech is bad, but, sometimes you begin to kind of because, everyone around you is very good, right? And, you have this team that does this like web page or this button or those kind of things, right? And I think when you kind of are in that environment and it's very structured and bureaucratic, you're climbing up this ladder, right? And you go from L1 to L2, L3, those kind of things, and you go from there. As opposed to a startup, it's like there's no designer, there's no like UX research. You're the engineer. You go talk to consumers, right? Oh, like you do front end, okay, you have to do back end as well, right? Like you have to figure it out, and stuff is breaking at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. every single day, right? But it's almost like when you're thrown into the fire, right? When you're thrown into the gamut, when you learn kind of how to, work with people, how to handle these emergencies, I think that really kind of tests your ability to become a leader, right? And so I think over time, that almost just forces you, right, to climb that path. So, I would say to people, I guess, in the beginning, okay, sure, get the foundations, get kind of the best practices of how it is like to work in a big company. But eventually, I think some of the fastest growth kind of careers that you'll probably are in smaller companies that are kind of a hyper scale as well.
Yeah. If I understand you correctly, I think that the big thought behind is that you have to widen your horizons. Actually, you need more skills than just particular work you do, right? So being a leader, does it mean to you that you must do everything? You must know everything, at least a little?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a combination of, obviously there's the people management skills, right? Which I think almost you have to do it to experience it, right? But, on the other side, it's more around like the scope of what you work on, right? And I think maybe in a bigger company, it's very narrow and very focused on one specific thing, right? Because there's so many other people around you that can handle other, parts of the website or the app or whatever it is, right? But I think broadening the horizons on both aspects, whether it be on the people management side, but also on the kind of the technical knowledge side, I think is advantageous for long-term career growth.
Can I ask you a very personal question about your management style? How you manage your people?
Sure,
What's your
sure.
approach to?
Oh man, okay. I have a lot of very interesting stories actually on this because I honestly, if I, was very honest with myself, like I think in the beginning, I don't think I was the best manager, right? And that's partially because, when I kind of came into the startup, right? Before I, obviously worked in very big companies, but I also worked in like professional services, like companies like Goldman Sachs or McKinsey, right? And especially in Wall Street, right? Which is a little bit different in Silicon Valley. There's a expectation of excellence in everything that you do, right? And so it's like, even if the color on your deck is wrong, right? Your manager will yell at you and be like, are you trying to lose us money? Because, you're pitching decks to clients who have, handling like billions and billions of dollars, right? And these small details matter a lot, right? And so I think when you shift to a startup mindset, suddenly it's actually very, very different. But, if you're obviously in that mindset, it's very hard to suddenly adjust it like overnight, right? Because in a startup, Facebook's first logo was like move fast and break things, right? And it's almost like if your first MVP is perfect, that means you're launching too slow, right? Because the only advantage that you have as a startup is that you can move fast, right? You can ship features, you can move fast, and you can navigate around these big companies. And so I think when I was starting to kind of manage people, I almost initially focused on these small details too much, right? Instead of letting people run and those kind of things. And so I think that's something that over time I had to learn to almost let go and be okay. Yeah, be okay with like mistakes and comfort and those kind of things. And I think now what we have kind of established in place is this culture of ultimate accountability, right? We want people to act like the leader themselves, right? Like, okay, like we'll let you, make the decision, right? But we're not going to micromanage you. We're not going to double check every single line of code or those kind of things, right? But you have to be accountable for this. And, if there's a mistake, there's either mistakes of obviously, maybe it was a careless mistake, but, or it was like, something that, oh, you forgot to check, then that's okay, right? It's not gonna be the end of the world. But ultimately, we're optimizing for a team that is almost like everyone is the CEO of their own product, right? Of their own feature, of their own workflow, and we can go from there. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing this. And I really appreciate that you shared that it's a journey, right?
Yeah,
You make
yes.
mistakes and you acknowledge those
Definitely.
mistakes.
And I'm still learning how to.
all of us.
Yeah.
Getting there. Thank you very much, Philip. The last part of the interview is the rapid fire section. That
Sure.
We have the same questions for all the guests, and they are very simple, but sometimes very generic as well. The first one is about your favorite tech tool that improves your productivity at work.
I think I have two recently that I started using. I forgot the name of it, but one of the things I started using is doing voice transcription, actually. So there's an extension on my Chrome browser where I can just transcribe everything. And I find that, especially for me, I talk very fast. So the way I talk is actually faster than how fast I type. So I find that very, very helpful. And then the second one is actually like a blocker, basically, that blocks certain sites during the day, right? So, for me, I need to kind of, even if you look at my phone, I'm very intense about this kind of stuff where, I think sometimes social media is great, but sometimes it's a distraction, especially during the day. So I have various apps or kind of tools that allow me to block certain sites, but also I turn my phone to like black and white during certain periods of the day, so that I'm less likely to use it, right? And I stay very focused on work. Yeah.
Thank you. The next question is, if you will be not technical startup founder, what will you be doing? What will be your career?
Yeah. I think, for me, one of the things I also, really enjoy is maybe like venture capital, actually, on the other side of the table as an investor. I think I'm the type of person where I love kind of talking to entrepreneurs and seeing what are the different ideas that they're building, seeing what the opportunities are in various industries. And for myself, I've always been an extrovert, so I love talking to people as well. So maybe sitting on the other side of the table and doing investing would be great. Yeah.
I believe it will come for you. I'm pretty sure it
hopefully,
will.
Hopefully.
The next question is, what are you most grateful for?
Yeah, I think above all, it's my family and my parents, and I think as a natural extension of that, it's kind of the opportunities I have. When I look back on the entrepreneurship journey, right, or the ability to take risks, I think a lot of it comes back to, your family situation. And I think for me, my parents had done a lot of the hard things in terms of life and been able to kind of establish this foundation for me to be able to, quit my job, move to Vietnam, start a company, and take risks, and hopefully it's gone well. So I'm very, very grateful for them, and I think, above all as well, like the way that they raised me and they put me in various activities like swimming or violin, which in the beginning I thought, like, I'm not going to be a violinist, I'm not going to be a swimmer, like why do I do that? But I realized that there's secondary traits, right, around grit, around working hard, right, around other kind of elements that translate very, very well to kind of your startup or entrepreneurship workflow as well.
Prepares you for that, yeah.
Exactly.
I feel the same, exactly.
Exactly.
Last two questions are very similar, but the opposite in the meaning. What's the best advice you ever get?
I think one of my favorite bloggers or kind of podcasts is this one called How to Get Rich Without Getting Lucky, by his name is Naval. So he's the CEO of AngelList, and he's almost like a philosopher. And one of the things that he advocates for is that, in order for you to build wealth, you have to build specific knowledge, right? And so you have to find something that is very authentic to yourself, right? And part of that is finding the things that you find fun, why other people think it's work, right? And that will give you a long-term competitive advantage, because in the hard times when other people are struggling or other people are like, oh, I don't really want to do this anymore, you'll be like, this is play to me. This is something that's very, very fun, right? And I think for me, in terms of career, like that's something that I've been constantly trying to orient my life towards. And, finding something that's more authentic to who I am, or working in situations where, like, is it a big company? Is it a small company that allow you to kind of best empower that kind of way of thinking as well.
Thank you. And what is the worst advice you ever got?
Yeah. I think the worst advice that I've gotten is, before I moved to Singapore, before I decided to do the company, a lot of people were like, what are you doing? You're throwing all your career and opportunity away, right? Because, again, very high paying job, great benefits and those kind of things. And I was quite fortunate because I had the opportunity to go back to actually business school. So I was back at Harvard Business School last year. And, I thought about actually a lot of the paths that people take versus the path that I take. And honestly, I think the opportunity to take risk, to move to Vietnam, to start this business has been honestly one of this most gratifying life experiences. And I don't think I would trade it for anything. And I think it's a similar attitude that I want to continue. And I think I'll end with this. Sam Altman, the current CEO of OpenAI, he wrote in one of his blogs that whatever he does next, right, in the book of his life, he wants everything that he's done before to be like almost like a footnote in the page that he's writing, right?
At the moment.
And I think that's an attitude that we should all strive towards, right? What is that next big thing, right? What is that next audacious project that you can take on as well? And I think, that's something that I hopefully I can live by as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Phillip, thank you very much for sharing all the interesting insights about your work, your career, and advice for our viewers. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.